Hello, I'm Kara O'Donnell, your host for County Board Wrap Up, our monthly virtual conversation with our county board members on the actions they take that affect all of us as a community. Joining us today is Board Chair Libby Garvey, as well as Board Member Katie Crystal. Thank you both for being here today. And now, after taking a break in August, the board came back to a September agenda filled with big issues, some of them a bit controversial. They also heard a sobering report from the county manager on the impact that the coronavirus pandemic is having on county revenues. But we are going to begin today by taking a look at the board's adoption of a ban on firearms in county government buildings, parks, and at special events. Libby, we'll start with you. How did this whole idea of this ordinance come about, and what exactly does it prohibit?
So it came about really because of an action in the General Assembly. I think a lot of us have been wanting for some time an ability to do more to control guns certainly in our buildings and our spaces. And we finally got the right to do that through the General Assembly. And a number of our neighboring jurisdictions have adopted this ordinance as well. And pretty much all of us, I believe, are really basing it very much almost exactly on what was passed by the General Assembly. And that is what we did. We did a little bit of tweaking to it because it's applying to basically all our facilities. So that includes parks outside. It includes our buildings. And we heard from a lot of particularly concealed carry weapon holders. And I've learned a lot. I understand for some people that wearing a gun is like wearing clothes. They put it on in the morning and they take it off at night. And so they're always just walking around with their guns. They don't even think about it. And they had a concern that they might end up in a park with a gun and get themselves, arrested and charged and their careers ruined, because this is a Class 1 misdemeanor if you violate it. So we worked to make one really clear that it wasn't enforced except where there was signage. It had to be clear. We're not trying to do a gotcha at all for people. So we worked on that. And then we also, we heard from folks concerned about their ability to provide security, particularly for religious events, that every now and then there might be something in the park where you would have a synagogue or a congregation doing something in one of our parks to celebrate the holidays or whatever. And because they're in the parks, that nobody could carry a weapon. And because they weren't carrying a weapon, they were feeling insecure. And certainly you watch what's going around in the country, that's understandable. So we carved out a bit of an exception for them. There's a special permit, which has not been yet put together. We're going to figure that one out. But a special permit so that concealed carry folks who meet the requirements of the permit and are registered as the event could be there providing security for that event. And those are the two main changes we made. And, we had, I thought, a really good dialogue and conversation with folks since we advertised it in July and then we adopted it this month. And I thought the conversations were good. What did you think, Katie?
Yeah, certainly we heard from a lot of impassioned gun carriers concerned about this. I think at the end of the day, the conversation boiled down to whether you as an Arlingtonian believe that you're safer in a park where there are fewer guns or where there are more guns. I think it's clear that those of us on the county board believe, and substantiated by a fair bit of research, that we're safer when there are fewer firearms. But I think as Libby mentioned, we understand, and I think had our horizons expanded by folks who feel passionately that that's not the case. So it was quite a conversation. I think, the only sort of nuance about those special event permits, likely what we'll do as our staff develops this, that permit will likely require for a security guard who's met our DCJS standards, which are our state standards for training. I think we have also learned that perhaps the process to get a concealed carry permit is not quite as onerous as we might hope for somebody carrying around an instrument that can actually cause death. And so the permit for security guards that we see at the state level requires significantly more training and experience. And so although, again, that permit process for a gun carrier at a special event on county property is not yet formalized by our manager and likely our police department, that's sort of what we're thinking right now.
Yeah. And also, I think we got to emphasize the signage issue. People were so worried about, it's got to be clearly marked. We had a lot of talk about what is the area adjacent, the word adjacent, and making it clear. So we really don't want to entrap anybody. We want to be clear. And the other big issue, Katie, I thought was, there is also a difference of opinion. Some people think that anybody with a gun ought to be able to provide public safety, and basically the board, I am not comfortable with anybody who's able to get a gun be deciding that they want to provide public safety. And we've been seeing issues with that, of course, around the country. And anyway, we can move on. The Second Amendment just continues. The logic continues to elude me. I believe there's a clause in there about carrying a weapon within a well-armed militia, well-trained militia. And where is the well-trained militia part? We're trying to put that in with the training and these different requirements. It's just not safe to have anybody who wants to have a gun running around with it, as far as I'm concerned. But that's me, and I think a majority of the people in Arlington.
Well, Libby, you touched on this before, but how will this ordinance be enforced? You mentioned the signage. Will there be police officers stationed at these parks specifically looking for this kind of thing, or how is this going to work?
No, it's simply if police notice somebody violating it, they'd just be a warning. They'd be asked to leave the premises with the gun. That's all. And I don't think we're envisioning changing things at all. And at our special events, you always have a lot of our police there for security just anyway. So
I think you'll also see a lot of our facilities do have staff. They probably aren't Arlington County Police Department, but they may be Parks and Recreation, library staff, and so forth. And so they'll have the ability to give that warning themselves, and if not, to call the county police department.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're not out to entrap anybody. And most people, we ask them to leave with their weapon, they will.
Mm-hmm.
And if they don't, then we've got an issue.
All right. Well, changing gears a little bit now, as a condition of its site plan for the Arlington headquarters, or the Amazon Arlington headquarters in Pentagon City, Amazon has agreed to build and maintain in perpetuity a brand new expanded Metropolitan Park. And at the September meeting, the board approved the master plan and design guidelines for that park. Now, the idea for a large park in the heart of Pentagon City, it's not new. It was first presented as part of the Pentagon City Phase Development Site Plan back in the 70s, but a new vision for this park came with the board's approval of the Amazon plan for HQ2. So explain to this the new and improved Met Park and how this is going to work with Amazon maintaining it. Is this going to be a public park? Is it a private park? Is it a little bit of both? How does that work?
Well, I think this is frankly one of the most exciting things we've had the chance to vote on so far in 2020, perhaps a low bar because it's been such a challenging year, but this is going to be a fabulous addition. As you mentioned, Kara, this is long envisioned for the Pentagon City area to have a really central park. And I think to have Amazon come in and as a condition of their site plan, which filled out the Met Park development area, they are paying for the design and building of the park as well as maintenance of it. So the way that's structured is that the park is going to be owned with Amazon and they're a public easement. So that's basically public access. And I think people, Arlingtonians and residents of 22202 and Pentagon City are going to experience that completely as a public park, which is really the design. But we should talk about what this park is because this is so exciting.
Beautiful.
Yes, it is beautiful. And those park enthusiasts or natural resources enthusiasts who followed along with our conversations in Arlington have seen the board adopt, at the urging of some of our urban forestry commissioners, parks and recreation commissioners, and other leaders, a commitment to biophilia, which is to say bringing nature into urban areas. And that is absolutely what this plan does. Native plants, shade trees. The park designer, which is an internationally recognized firm, really was deeply inspired by the native resources around this area of the county, as well as the Potomac River and that sort of undulating natural feel. And so, I think folks who maybe aren't as familiar with biophilia are going to know it when they see it, when this park is completed. It is absolutely about bringing a little bit of the wild and a little bit of natural spaces into one of our most developed areas.
Yeah, I love the way they started out talking about the fall line because, my elementary years were in New England. And one of the first things I remember learning about was the fall line. And I actually still look at it. I said, oh, that's the fall line, which is kind of cool. We are right on the fall line. But they really kind of went back through history and into the nature thing. I think, Katie, I've been doing this, longer than you, but you've been doing this for quite a while. I was so impressed with how everybody liked the design. They had done so much work with the community despite needing to do a lot of it virtually, but all of our commissions, our citizens, I don't think we heard a single, concern about really anything except water. I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit. We all asked about water. I know you asked.
Yeah, we this was raised by one of the key advocates for a biophilic Arlington about the desire to see some sort of modest water feature, not a water feature like a spray ground or others that we might anticipate, but a sort of natural water feature, right? To create the addition of a small brook or creek. We heard back from the Amazon team and their designer that was a little hard for them to effectuate because, interestingly enough, this park is largely built on top of parking garages. But of course, that's something that I'm sure the cutting edge designers have contended with before. And so we hope that might be something that they'll consider in the post-approval process too.
Throughout the pandemic, it's made us all appreciate outdoors and parks and open spaces, all that much more. Do you think that's changed the community's input or the interest surrounding this park at all?
Yes, and I think, we'd be remiss if we didn't acknowledge that the process of getting to this park, which is going to open in 2023, has been challenging for the neighbors. We had an item on our agenda, I think 2-3 months ago, maybe, and the contractor who's doing the construction for the Amazon building has been using part of the park. We were divided as a board about whether that should continue. I think ultimately, though, we have heard from quite a few people that they are just incredibly hungry for the opportunity to recreate outside at this time when we are working in our homes and learning in our homes and bereft of the many opportunities to gather, that these types of public spaces are more important than ever.
And they're tired of the construction. That's, that's really hard. And we've still got the one more big building to go, but I haven't heard, I think the noise has settled down and I think it's working out fairly well, but it was really, we really have to throw bouquets to the neighbors because it was really tough for a while as they were going through that.
Okay, well, we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to take a look at that much discussed sidewalk ordinance that sought to enforce social distancing and limit congregating on public sidewalks and streets in posted areas. Stay with us. Now, we've heard quite a bit in the last couple of weeks about the emergency ordinance that's become known as the Sidewalk Ordinance, which required social distancing on sidewalks and streets in certain areas around the county and restricting the number of people who could gather outside in those areas. Now, after being in place for about 6-7 weeks so far, the board voted against making that ordinance permanent. Libby, we'll start with you. How did this all, what was the background leading up to this vote, and what had you seen in that time period?
Yeah, well, it's all about COVID and are trying to figure out how to handle it and how to live with it here. So what we were seeing back a number of weeks ago, remember we had quite a peak and then we closed everything down and we started to open things up, and of course our number of cases went up. And of course, we have a lot of people in Arlington, many of us wearing masks and social distancing, but particularly outside some of our establishments where there's, at night, they're restaurants. We don't have anything. I think it's just only a bar. But as the hours got later, there got to be bigger and bigger crowds, and they were pretty close together, and people weren't wearing masks. And of course, as folks relax when they're drinking, they get a little more relaxed. They forget about the social distancing. So we were increasingly concerned about the way people were gathering and trying to encourage them. Our police and would try to kind of remind them to move apart, but it wasn't very effective. Sometimes people just didn't even pay much attention. And sometimes people even all have good intentions. They move apart, but 10 minutes later, it's a new group of people and they've forgotten because they're having a good time, which is what we want people to have a good time. So the manager, in talking to our public health, decided that we would maybe try being able to ticket people to make it, see if they could take it a little more seriously and really clearly posting where people needed to be standing apart. What was going on also at the same time was both Maryland and the District of Columbia, they were clamping down more on their having opened up, they were cutting back on hours. They were adding more restrictions, which seemed to possibly be attracting more people young people to Arlington, which just kind of compounded the issue of spreading of the virus. So there's a lot we don't know about the virus, but we do know people standing in close proximity and talking and breathing on each other does spread the disease and is really problematic. So The manager was feeling at that point, with the changes going on around us and a concern about what we were seeing and a concern about an uptick, we just needed to right away do what we could. So this was an attempt to try to get people to separate and do the right thing. It had very mixed success. We actually didn't really enforce it to start much. We just kept trying to get a little tougher and a little tougher. We started hearing a lot of upset from people, thinking that they were going to get entrapped in a family of 4. Crossing the street would suddenly be close and they'd get a ticket. And of course, that wasn't the intention at all. And we kept saying, we don't want to give out tickets. We just want people to do the right thing. But in the end, and what happens is legally, under an emergency, we could adopt it right away. But then we have to re-adopt it and make it permanent, as you said, and that was for this meeting. And it was interesting how it went down, and I'll turn it over to Ms. Crystal in a minute, because I was the losing vote on this. It turned out it wasn't very, it wasn't really super effective. Our police were not finding it. It was difficult to enforce, sometimes maybe creating more problems than possibly it solved. I thought it made people to pay attention like they should, and I thought having that people aware that they really could get tickets made it a little more serious and gave us a little more oomph in our encouraging them to separate. But my colleagues didn't really agree, so it was a 4-1 vote. I lost, and I'll turn it over to Ms. Crystal to go talk for the other side.
Yeah, and I think Libby just had a great description of sort of the circumstances in which we found ourselves. I think for me, and perhaps for some of my other colleagues, this seemed like the most narrowly scoped way of tackling a problem, which we don't have evidence that this is causing the spread of COVID, the behavior at the late night restaurants. But I do think it's sort of undermining a lot of members of our community's faith that we're in this together. I think one of the things we've heard a lot is that why are bars open and schools aren't, right? And so we knew this was a challenge to try to tackle in some way, if only because of the fact that it's undermining that consistent public health message, which is the most critical thing to stop the spread. As Libby was mentioning, the way Virginia law is structured, there are not bars, there are restaurants that serve alcohol. And that means that any restriction on the category of restaurants is going to apply to the mom and pop pizza shop and their ability to serve beer after a certain hour or at all. The same way it would apply to a bar with a long line in front of it. So we sort of tried to narrowly scope it, see if we could tackle this issue. I think we heard loud and clear from community members that there was confusion and there was upset at this idea that we might be restricting folks' movement on the sidewalk. Libby talked about, I think we tried our best to try to be clear about, that this was really limited to, frankly, a handful of blocks in Arlington where there was clear signage. Nevertheless, I think it was ill-received for that reason. And then ultimately, it wasn't working. It wasn't changing behavior. I know that our police, frankly, had been harassed, in one case assaulted, trying to enforce this, which is a sign of how frustrating this behavior is and some of the individuals who are engaged in it. But what we also saw was that our police have been working for years with the Arlington Restaurant Initiative, which has basically had its origins in the years where drinking in Clarendon was frankly out of control. We would have a lot of negative impacts of that. So the ARI was founded to basically try to work with the restaurants as partners to see if they could control that behavior. And as a result, there is a strong partnership between some of our most popular nightlife spots and the police. And what we did see from the police was that they were able to engage the restaurants in, for example, expanding bollards, providing security to join the police to try to get this message out to the patrons. So insofar as I think most of the patrons are willing to listen, I think we have a way forward without this ordinance. And insofar as they're not, I think this ordinance was frankly causing conflict and more trouble for our police than a helpful tool. So going forward, I think that the next step is very much to kind of continue that effort, the sort of positive behavior. And I will note that inside most of the restaurants, we've seen compliance with the governor's orders. In the few restaurants where we haven't, we'll have the police available now to work with the public health team to shut that behavior down. This is, I think it was absolutely worth trying. I think it's not working. And I think that's probably where a majority of the board landed, that it was better to focus efforts, be it inside the restaurants or working with the restaurants on that outside the restaurant management as a way of moving forward.
What would your message be to those who go out to the restaurants in the evening, sometimes do have to queue up outside for quite a bit of time? The ordinance, will sunset at the end of September, I believe. And what will your message be to get out to these communities to say, to keep it positive, to encourage that compliance?
Probably the same message we've always had, I think, Katie. We just won't say, or you get a ticket. I think it's just, we're just going to continue what we're doing. That was part of the reason I was okay continuing, because it's basically what we're doing. I don't think it's actually going to change.
Yeah.
I was really worried a little bit about the public messaging, that it's maybe not, it doesn't seem so serious, but I don't think really that much will change. I mean, doesn't matter what we do, the virus is going to do what the virus is going to do. They don't care how we feel about it, what we do about it, but it's going to do its thing. And that means if you stand close to people for any length of time, you're very likely to get infected. If both of you are wearing masks, that will help. But basically, distance is the most important. That was one of the things that Dr. Verghese kind of made clear in his part of the presentation, was how important distancing is. Masks are good. And certainly everybody should be wearing a mask, but it's really important to distance.
That's exactly right. And I think it's probably worth noting, there was a lot of frustration. Why go after this particular group of people or this particular set of sidewalks? The point is we're trying to enforce congregating not happening in Arlington, because that is exactly, as Libby was saying, how this virus spreads. I think we've heard from a lot of people interested in a mask ordinance, particularly with our neighbors in Alexandria adopting it. But exactly as Libby was noting, the most important thing you can do is stay 6 feet away. If you're not able to, then the mask is, an important next step. Certainly masks are still required indoors, but simply staying 6 feet apart is, in fact, the most important thing you can do. And we will be continuing to put that message out and to enforce it, when it's happening at the inside of buildings, and working with the restaurants to try to manage it outside.
And we're going to start seeing changes because the weather's going to change, right? So there won't be so much standing outside. That's going to change. Flu may hit. Who knows what's going to happen with the pandemic? We're going to continue. I mean, it's just part of our effort to work with the disease and evolve. We tried this, and the thought was that it didn't seem to work very well. So we're going to be innovating. I think the theme is innovating as we go, trying to figure out how to match the dangers of the virus with human behavior.
And on that note, a little PSA, everybody get your flu shot.
Absolutely.
I've already gotten mine.
Me too. Now, at the September meeting, the board also welcomed the county manager's first steps towards a community process for potentially renaming streets, bridges, and county-owned properties in Arlington that would also consider changing Arlington's seal, logo, and flag. And what was the impetus for the manager's proposal on this?
Absolutely. So, since June, when we saw George Floyd murdered in Minneapolis, there has been an outpouring in our community. Marches, engagement, but also specific calls for reforms, not only about the sort of substantive ways in which Arlington's racist or Confederate past still has impact on policy and practice today, but also on symbols of that Confederate or past or racism or the past of enslavement that we know also happened here in Arlington County. We've certainly seen a lot of engagement around the issue of the county logo, and that is in fact derived from the county seal, which is an image, so to speak, of Arlington House, which the federal government has designated as a memorial to Robert E. Lee. And so by extension, I know for a lot of Arlingtonians who wrote us or spoke to us, there was a sense that logo or that seal was standing for a set of values surrounding the Confederacy, enslavement, dehumanization that certainly didn't represent Arlington's values to date. So you've seen some of the efforts underway already to talk about these sort of substantive vestiges of racism, like our police practices group. And now we're also trying to open the doors to have that conversation about the future of symbols and names in Arlington. So I think the board agrees that the time has come to make that change. And now we're looking forward to taking the next few months to talking with others about what should replace it, about what other honorifics to the Confederacy remain in our community and which we should discuss for the future. And Libby, I know you've been working incredibly hard with the manager and our new chief equity officer on trying to shape what that conversation will look like.
Yeah, and we're hiring a local group, a consultant that I've worked with for many years called Challenging Racism to help guide the community with kind of guided conversations. And I'm pretty excited about this process that's moving forward. That was kind of already underway before we kind of we got the idea that we needed to change the logo and the seal and the flag. But we've been, of course, getting calls to changing the names. And I think what we've realized, in fact, it's hard to remember, but at one point we were really working on celebrating our 100th anniversary this year. And it was supposed to be 100 years, looking back and looking forward, looking both ways. And part of what I had wanted to do then was to have a real good understanding of our history, because I think you can do a much better job of understanding where you are and where you want to go if you really understand who you are and how we got here. And in fact, we had held one panel, and that had been with Black Americans here in our community, Black residents that have been here for years and years and years, talking about their experiences here. I learned a lot. It was a wonderful panel. That's the one panel we managed to carry off. And that process made me even more encouraged about how we're approaching it here. I think the need to educate is what the manager was talking about, the different steps. And the first one is education. It's just really to develop an understanding, again, of who we are and how we got here. And I've been learning a lot about history, and I always figure I'm pretty well informed. Well, there's a lot to learn. And I think as we start to do it and think about these things in an intentional way. So the real dispute here, I think you probably agree, Katie, was how fast we're going to do it. It's not it says like how fast and how. And, I think we were chatting ahead of time, and Katie was pointing out it's really only a difference of about 3 months, which in Arlington wait time is like a nanosecond, right? But I know, but to some people it feels, there's a whole lot of emotion and feeling. But my real effort here is I understand, I do understand, I can't totally share, totally understand, but the feelings and the emotions that this brings up. But I really think we need, more light and less heat on this issue of as all of the issues we're dealing with. I think our job as board members and leaders is to help kind of bring down the temperature. We've got so much chaos and swirl going on with the election, with a real awakening in this country that systemic racism really is a thing. I think a lot of people just kind of thought, they're just talking about it. It's not really real. That videotape murder of George Floyd just made it so clear. So I think we're in a good place. The board, it was a 5-0 vote on how we're going to move forward. We're absolutely committed to doing this. But I think what we all want is to have a really good, thoughtful conversation, and that we move forward in an intentional way and put in place a process for not only the logo, the seal, it's about more than that. We've been asked to change the names of bridges, roads, buildings, and that includes Wilson Boulevard, and there've been a little rumblings about changing the name of Arlington County itself. So before we just kind of launch off in 1,000 different directions, I think we need to get a process and an understanding and approach it in, a very deliberate, thoughtful kind of way. And I think it'll make us much stronger as a community, actually. I'm looking forward to it.
I think too, we're trying to approach this, or at least speaking for myself, with a little humility that the 5 members of the board don't have all the answers on what should change and how. Certainly with the local, we've heard from a number of the community, number of members of the community. But on some of these other issues, right, this opportunity for the community to weigh in and to learn from the history, because I think that's where we are remiss. I think the logo should change. I know all 5 of us think the logo should change. To do it without the conversations and the history means we've really missed an opportunity to talk about Arlington's history. For example, the Confederate names that we saw crop up in the 20s and 30s. I was just on a call last night kicking off the Lee Highway Alliance's engagement process about renaming Lee Highway. And Wilma Jones, who's a historian and author, as well as 4th generation, I think, Halls Hill resident, was pointing out Lee Highway wasn't Lee Highway after the end of the Civil War. Lee Highway was named Lee Highway during a wave of resistance to new freedoms being expressed by Black residents in the 20s and 30s. And so I think there's a really important opportunity for us to discuss these symbols and understand how these symbols reflect decisions that have been baked into our zoning ordinance, for example, or other key processes in Arlington. And so I don't want to miss the chance for us to have real conversations about that history, to understand how we've been shaped by the Confederate legacy, by the racist legacy in our community. Because I think if we really are going to embark on a set of anti-racist actions to make this community the inclusive community that we so wish to be, we have to know where we're coming from and how we're going to change it.
Yeah, and I'll just build on one point, because I've been saying this a lot, and I appreciate you bringing it up. It really doesn't matter what the board thinks, what the 5 of us think. It matters what the community as a whole thinks, and we need to really work that through. So we're facilitators here. That's what we are, I think. And
this will not be something done overnight. This is something we're really going to kind of take the time and research, learn, and make an informed decision altogether.
Some people said it took us 400 years to get here. It's going to take us a little while to get out of here. But I think the understanding, Katie, it was really revelatory to me. I'd never really focused on the fact that it was during the 20s and 30s when all of those names changed. It was just part of the South trying to refight and relitigate the Civil War. And they've been doing that's been far too successful. We need to finish that war and finish it up and move forward as a united, healthy, just country.
There we go. On that note, we will take one more short break. And when we come back, we're going to close out our discussion with a look at how the coronavirus has affected county revenues. We'll be right back. We're closing out today with a bit of a sobering report from County Manager Mark Schwartz on how the coronavirus has affected county revenues. Now, we may recall back in April, the manager presented a revised budget after the immediate shutdowns that took place. Wow, a little more than 6 months ago now. But he did warn at that time that he might have to come back to do some further revisions, and he did just that. What did you folks hear?
So it was indeed sobering, and I was listening to your intro, actually. So this wasn't a decision that we made today at the board meeting, but I think in many ways it was one of the most important issues that we dealt with. It's preparing ourselves and preparing our community and letting them know what we face. So yes, the manager, way back when in March or so, he threw out his 410 plus pages of the budget, carefully prepared, which, as Mark had said, was a quaint artifact of history, and we embarked on this adventure. So what he did say is, so that budget that he presented was kind of like an addendum of 12 pages, which we finally adopted, and we were planning to come back, and this is our first time to come back and see how things are actually going. At that time, staff was sort of thinking that, our revenues were going to take a dive, boom, and then we were going to kind of recover from the virus, and we're going to come back up. Well, we all know that the virus is not going away anytime soon, and that's a whole issue on obviously how we're handling it as a nation on the federal level and everything else. But what's happened is we went a dive, and then we're kind of coming up, but it's kind of a slow increase, and some sectors, of course, are not recovering at all right now. So revenues are down even more, and it's looking like we have a really significant shortfall gap for this year. And of course, we cannot run a deficit. So already a good number of months into the fiscal year starts in July, already here in September, we're down. I think the total is about 60 million. I think for us, it's 28 to 38 million. And then that there's a gap for the schools. You add it all together, we're looking at $60 million gap plus or minus, and we have to make that up somehow before the end of the fiscal year, which is next July. So we have a number of levers, and that was kind of presented with our thing. We have every year we have carryover. So the carryover usually goes to help build the next budget, make it a little easier, and also goes into a few major issues like affordable housing, and allows us to increase our affordable housing investment fund. This year, I think probably a lot more of it's going to go into just simply filling this budget gap that we've got, but it doesn't begin to fill it. We have gotten some, pulling back on expenses and what we're doing. We may need to be doing more of that. So this is just kind of a little foreshadowing for the presentation that we're going to be getting in October, when we will know more. And then I'll turn it over to Katie, because I'm sure she's got, some, it's interesting. We're kind of different. This is my 24th budget, maybe my 25th. I've got to figure out coming up. It'll be my 25th. This is the hardest one I've ever seen. I'm anticipating it being really rough next year. So much depends on what happens in November. So what we're planning on now is no more money from the federal government, which is part of what makes this really hard. And the money we have gotten so far, which has been helpful, has to be spent by the end of December, by the end of the calendar year. And it has to go for certain expenses. So it doesn't help us backfill some of these huge gaps that we have. If the Democrats, win, and we win big in November and can start controlling how this country runs a bit, I think there'll be a lot more support for local governments. We certainly, while we're hurting, a lot of places are hurting a whole lot more than we are. I mean, I keep reminding myself, if this is tough for us, what is it like for places that don't have, we have some contingency funds. We've got some things we can fall back on. A lot of places do not. So that is fascinating. If it ends up that we don't win big, or maybe we take the White House, but we don't take the Senate or something like that, or God forbid we don't take the White House, then I think it's going to be really, really difficult. We will be in a very different world, and we'll have to deal with that. But I'm still hopeful for November, and hopeful we will get through this. But it's not going to be easy. So, Katie, I've kind of gone along. What's your perspective? Yeah.
I do think one thing that maybe is worth noting about what you just shared is you're absolutely right, There's restrictions on what those relief dollars from the first and only relief package can be spent on. But I think it's really important to note that they can be spent on eviction prevention, food assistance, social services. And so we have been incredibly committed to those activities, allocating at this point millions of dollars to make sure that people don't lose their housing, don't go hungry, that our kids do have access to the internet. That is a good use of that relief money. We will continue to do that. And so for anybody who may be dependent or in need of those resources from the county, I think that's one of the most important things that we can communicate, because that is an allowable use of CARES money. It will not be subjected to cutbacks. We are still here to help.
Yeah.
And I think you're
even if the CARES money stops, I think we're determined.
Yeah, and I think, from here, I think you're right, Libby. We do have options, right? We have what might be closeout money. I know the schools will as well. Our manager maintains a COVID contingent. I know there is wishful thinking in some sectors of the community that we've got a giant pile of break glass in case of emergency money. That is not the case, and I know that our partners in schools don't either. But I do know at this point, and I think you were right to point out, this wasn't a vote or a board item, it was just an update. At this point, our management and finance team are working with our manager, are working with the superintendent and the school's finance team to try to make sure that our estimates are as accurate and frankly conservative as possible, and to try to understand the different sources of funds we might be able to tap into, or the hopefully relatively painless cuts that could be made in fiscal 21. There's not an imminent action before either the county board or school board to make big cuts in our adopted fiscal 21 budgets.
Right. And I think get the best information and real update will be in November. I mean, just traditionally, that's when a lot of the numbers start to become a lot clearer because of the taxes and things. And that will be after the election. So I'm hoping by November, we'll have a better idea. October will, as time goes forward, we get better and better pictures of what's happening and where we're going to be. But it's still, we know it's going to be difficult. We don't know how difficult. But I think, Katie, as you pointed out, we're working really closely with our partners in the school system, and we are absolutely determined to make sure that people are not out on the street or going hungry. And we're going to continue to work forward. It's just going to be not easy.
Sure. And the loss of revenue is coming from such a mix of sources. You have your property taxes, you have your sales taxes, you have the transient occupancy taxes, since people are not staying in hotels as often as we had anticipated or hoped they would. And I guess the big question is we just don't know how long we're going to be in this kind of situation.
No, we don't. It's been interesting that some sectors have done pretty well. It turns out, I read we're more able to work virtually here than anywhere else in the country. We've got more people who can work virtually. So obviously that's an advantage. We've got some businesses, they're doing just fine. Amazon would obviously be one of the examples, right? So there are a number of businesses here, companies here that are doing well. We have the way our restaurants have pivoted, and all of the work that our AED and our CPHD have been doing, our technical staff have been doing to help them have the outside seating. We are working to find a way for for restaurants to maybe do some covered or protected seating even in the winter months. Working very closely with the business community. So a lot of places are not doing as badly as you would think. It's the hotels and such that have really done badly. And then finally, excuse me, the spending. Spending has not been so bad because we have so many people in protected jobs. So people who work for the federal government, their salaries continue to come in. People who work for companies that aren't affected, their salaries keep. So we managed to keep the economy going, but we want to make sure we do as best we can to bring along the sectors that are hurting. But as time goes on, it drags us down more and more. So
Sure. Okay. Well, on that note, that will bring us to the end of another County Board wrap-up. Libby and Katie, thank you both very much for joining us today. We will be back in October with another County Board wrap-up with the latest deep dive on the board's actions. Until then, Stay safe. Don't forget to register to vote. And if you prefer, to apply for that mail-in ballot for the November 3rd election. Just visit the county website, arlingtonva.us, for more information. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you in October.
Thanks a lot. Take care. Wear those masks.